Anuradha ma'am, namaste.
Namaste, Praveen ji.
Welcome to Prana Stories.
Thank you so much for having me. Namaste to you and to all your viewers.
Thank you so much. The first instance, I would want to say that since I read this book of yours, and I have also reading quite a bit of you, and you're a traveler, right?
Yes.
And I would like to put it as a Indic traveler.
Pilgrim.
Pilgrim. Okay, yeah, pilgrim. But in a way, I am actually very envious of you because you got to travel so many places, so many things, and you have beautifully chronicled that experience in this book, and not just this book, but several other books as well.
Right.
Definitely, we will give all the links to your book in the description. But like I said, I used to be, I mean, I also started traveling, backpacking into different places of India, but then I couldn't sustain it and carry it forward. But you have been doing that consistently, and also chronicling it through your blog, which is IndiTales, right? So beautiful. I would say it's a beautiful life that you have had so far in terms of traveling, is what I can sort of say.
I would agree that I lead an envious life.
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody would want to travel, read, and write.
Yeah,
But having said that, what you see looks very glamorous.
yeah,
But the behind the scene research, rigor,
yeah.
hardships that go is not something that many people can take.
Right, yeah.
So to stay on that path for 20 years now, I started blogging in 2004, and we are talking in 2024.
Yeah,
It has to be something that becomes your life's purpose.
Yeah.
That's something that destiny has chosen for you.
correct. Yeah, so that's like, that clearly tells out the underlying thing that you just mentioned. It's the purpose. So you're completely driven by purpose,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that's beautiful. So let's start maybe with this. So India, as people, many the narratives that are floated across by the so-called historians or the so-called people who write about things, right? Who have not even traveled, but they write about India, right? The idea of India, that this, so many things they do. I must say that they should first travel India like you, and then talk about India. So the popular narrative that is floated around, that India never existed before. It is the British who sort of united India, and then we had a country. That's what it is. I mean, there is some. First of all, it was a civilization, right? And then there were multiple kingdoms and all those things, and then this British invasion happened and all these things. Yes, but the idea of India, or the India was not there, is a popular thing that was driven into our upbringing, history books and stuff like that. And the British are the people who gave India many things, and they united India, and all these things are the popular things. So I would like you to, like in this book, they should actually, people who sort of believe that, they should read this book and get the common cultural strands that we have, the Tirtha Yatras that we had even before the Islamic invasions, or even before that, right? Like 1,000 years before. The Tirtha Yatras, the cultural strands of in different places that we have, and the common theme that is there. So I would like you to take us through a parikrama of this land.
Okay.
Right.
So to begin with, this narrative that India was never one. Okay. So I would go back to the Indian scriptures. Every scripture in Indian scripture defines the boundaries of Bharat Desh very, very clearly. They say the south of Himalayas and the north of the sea. Okay, so if you look at the strand of Himalayas, right from the easternmost to the westernmost part of Himalayas, anything below that till the oceans is Bharatvarsh. Okay, it's very, very clearly defined in every Purana.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the geography of Bharat Varsha. Varsha is a geographical indicator. So there is no doubt about this, that the land that is called Bharat is this geographically. Even today, we continue to call it the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
So politically, there may be multiple countries occupying this land mass, but geographically, it is still India and Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
You know. Now coming to the diversity of India. So India had kingdoms. We very famously know that post-independence, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel brought about 540 or so kingdoms together, and they all decided to call themselves this country called India. Republic of India, Bharatiya Ganarajya. Now, some of these kingdoms were very, very small, just a few square kilometers. Only a few were big ones. Now, India has always existed in the divisions of kingdoms. They were called Janapadas at different points in time, and those Janapadas are listed. If you go by the Kshetra names, then India was divided in different kshetras. Even today, you go to what we call Uttar Pradesh today, would have a Braj area where, which has its own subculture. You have Awadh, which is around Ayodhya, which has its own subculture. Then you have Bundelkhand around Jhansi, which has its own subculture. Similarly, any state can be divided into different kshetras where they have their own subculture. The broader culture may be the same, the subcultures are different. And that subculture, the more nuanced you go, it will boil down to a family. So each family has their own culture. Okay? Now, but how do people interact within these kingdoms, or interacted within these kingdoms? So there were 2 or 3 things that connected people. To be fair to British, they did have this daunting question that what connects us. We speak different languages, we dress up differently, we eat different things. We have different, I won't say we have different culture, but the way we express them is different. There's diversity in expression. So it must have been daunting for them. I mean, we are the descendants of the original people of this land, and we are struggling to figure out what connects you and me. You come from Kerala, right?
Yeah.
I come from Punjab. What connects you and me? We are trying to figure out. So somebody coming from a distant island is bound to have those questions. Okay, they answered it in their own way. But what connected India across time periods is 2 or 3 things. One, if we look at in space, what connected us is our common faith. So if you look at the iconography of Shiva, we all know how Shiva looks. We all know he's always accompanied by a Nandi. Now the Nandi may be dressed differently in South India and dressed differently in Himalayan kingdom, but it's always Shiva and Nandi. And nobody needs to tell us that a Shivaling represents Shiva. So wherever we go, if we see a Shivalanga, we will bow down to it. The same goes for every other deity. So our common belief in common deities is what connected us. Second, our awareness of all the sacred spots on this country. So no matter where you are born in this country, you have a desire to visit Kashi. No matter where you live, you want to visit Rameshwaram, you want to visit Somnath, Dwarka, you want to visit Kamakhya, all spread across the country. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether you lived in the Chol kingdom or Pallava kingdom or Malabar kingdom, but you wanted to visit Kashi, which is obviously a distant kingdom. Now, how was that enabled? Now, if you read the pilgrim traditions, a lot of which are actually also documented by British, or from the time we started documenting in a modern way of it, pilgrims never had any restrictions. So we didn't have a visa system, of course. Visa system is a very, very recent phenomena. But pilgrims were always allowed to visit other kingdoms. There were festivals like Kumbh Mela or Pushkarams or many other festivals that we have around the year, Kartik Mela, Magh Melas, where the pilgrims would congregate at a place. So every 12 years you will congregate at Prayag or Haridwar or Nasik or Ujjain, and people from all across the country will come. There used to be some kind of checks on the borders, but they were open. Borders were open for pilgrims, which also meant that disguise of pilgrims was used for spying activities. There are also mentions of full-fledged spying activities that were carried out during these periods when these melas happened, but that's a very small part of the whole thing. So pilgrimage was happening. Second, trade was happening. Trade was always happening amongst the kingdoms, amongst the trading communities of these places, and these two were the connecting factors. Now, I'll take an example of it. Adi Shankaracharya, he was born in a village called Kaladi in Kerala, down south. As an 8-year-old, he traveled from Kerala to the banks of Narmada River at Omkareshwar, where his guru was.
As an 8-year-old?
As an 8-year-old, okay. He lived only for 32 years, and at 8, he left Kerala, and then he traveled across the country. Now, you have to see that as 8-year-old, either he or his parents or his guardians were aware of a guru who lives on the banks of Narmada. And there were means to travel from Kerala to Narmada. Mostly it was done on rivers. So there was a lot of river transportation that used to happen in good old days, which we lost during the British era. So till about Mughal era also we find a lot of records of big ships being used on Yamuna and Ganga and used for transportation of people as well as goods. So Adi Shankaracharya also probably used the river routes, because he traveled quite fast, to travel across the country. And after he spent his time with the guru at Omkareshwar, then he traveled across the country. He could travel to different universities, different gurus. He could meet all the intellectuals everywhere he visited. So this tells us that people were aware of each other very well. They were aware of the universities. So Nalanda was getting students from across the world. There were Chinese travelers who were so frequently coming to Nalanda. So people were aware of it. Today we think that if you don't have internet, you are not aware of anything, So even today, if let's say you are a student and you want to go to IIT, you have to know that there is an IIT, there is a value in IIT, and it matches with your purpose of life. So you apply for IIT. Similarly, people were aware. So people were traveling for education, people were traveling for trade, people were traveling for pilgrimage, and people were traveling for all possible reasons, and that was connecting India. So travelers, pilgrims were the people who were those invisible threads that were connecting India.
Correct.
So this is about the spaces, and our Tirth Kshetras are very, very clearly defined. Our Tirth Yatras are mentioned in many scriptures, but Skanda Puran is like the lonely planet of its times.
Okay.
It documents our Tirth Kshetras in minute details. And I've had the good fortune of translating Ayodhya Mahatmay from Skanda Puran. So I can talk in detail about Ayodhya. It talks about the important visitors to Ayodhya. So it tells that Skanda visited Ayodhya. He saw this. After him, Agastya visited Ayodhya and he saw this. After that, Veda Vyas visited Ayodhya and he saw this. And assuming that they visited at different points in time, which also means that things had changed every time somebody visited. So for example, I last visited in 2021, which means that since then, a lot of change has happened. This time a big change has happened, but smaller changes will keep happening. Then the Puran describes each and every tirtha. We think only Ram Mandir is a tirtha. But Ayodhya has as many as maybe 100 odd tirthas that you can visit. Okay. And there is a full calendar of what you can do when, based on the tithis. And there are a lot of smaller things that happen around the year. So no matter what time you go, you can do something there. Okay. You go there on a generic timeline. and you go there on a specific timeline which is specific to you. I'll come to that. So there are these documentations of our Tirtha Kshetras which are available to everybody. So these Puranas were available to everybody and they were taught in the Gurukuls, or at least the information was available, and lot of it was transmitted in a story format. So you may not know anything about the place, but you've heard some story about it. So for example, I grew up in North India, and my grandmother in her 60s, she did an all India tour when she visited South India.
Wow.
Okay. And she saw all the big temples of South India, and she came back and she told me stories. She told me that temples there are so big, people there wear this, they eat this, they do this, and that stayed with me. And when I got an opportunity to visit those temples, that information was there in my head. I knew that I have to expect this. I was prepared, as well as I was looking for that.
Okay.
So so to come back to your point, these are the things that connected. This is in terms of space. Now, in terms of time, so if we have a space-time axis and XY axis, then our festivals become those points in time where you go. Okay. And again, those were well known. So there is a documented anecdote that when in Prayagraj, there was a Kumbh, and people were preparing. The local kings, they knew that a lot of crowds would come. So the Kumbh Mela, if you know, it happens on the temporary plain that is created by the receding waters of Ganga and Yamuna. So during the monsoon, the water fills up, the rivers swell up. Okay. And when the water recedes around this time of the year, around December, and in January, you have the Mela on the plain. So nobody knows what the shape of that land would be. So every year, every 12 years or every 6 years, when the Kumbh Mela happens, it happens on a different shape of land. So people were preparing, and the Britishers were astonished that you've not announced anything, you've not made a single announcement, and suddenly on one day there are lakhs of people who land up here. So they asked that how do these people know that this is the day that you have to be here? They said it's a 2 paisa panchang or a local pandit who will tell you the tithi of this thing, and everybody knows that on this tithi this happens, and they just reach in there. So this common knowledge that these tithis are important, and those tithis are dictated by the cosmological motion. They are not dictated by any other convention. They are only dictated by the movement of, let's say, Jupiter in the sky, or relative movement of Jupiter and Sun and Moon in the sky. So based on that, people landed. So in time, people knew that at what point in time we have to go. So for example, Kartik Maas. The Kartik Purnima is one of the most auspicious days. And every part of India celebrates it in its own way. In Kashi, it is celebrated as Dev Deepavali, In Odisha, it is celebrated at Boita Bandhana, where they, on that day, the sadhabas or the traders of Odisha used to leave for Southeast Asia. So they still celebrate that festival by, floating paper boats or banana leaf boats in the sea. In South, you have Kartikai, you have these grand lamps being lit. In Goa, you call it Tripurari Purnima, and there is a midnight boat festival that happens on a river. Everywhere the diyas or the light is important on that day. That is the common element. But rest of the things are dependent on where you are, what your environment is, what your weather is, and lot of other things. So there are spaces that are sacred, and there are times which are sacred. So when they intersect, the time and the space, that's when we have festivals. And these were very, very common. So I'm yet to see a festival that is not common across all of India. It may be called by a different name. It may be slightly expressed in a different way, but it's celebrated on the same tithis. and it is celebrated more or less to the underlying idea or the underlying belief is the same.
Yeah.
The expression is different. So that's what people call it unity in diversity. I would call it's diversity in unity. So at the core, there is unity. At the base, we are united in core. The way we express it is diverse.
Right. And that was, I mean, I have read it in some other book also, that even though there were warring kingdoms, I mean, even this is before the Islamic invasions, 1,200 years ago, even though there were warring kingdoms, these things were happening on their own.
Yes.
Like there was no restriction on trading or people visiting, Tirtha Kshetras and all that. That kept happening. Yeah. Even though the soldiers were fighting, this was going on. There was no restriction on that.
So Tirtha Kshetras belong to everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
So even today, you can say, I have this classification that I teach, which is you have royal temples, you have Kula Devata temples, you have Kshetra Devata temples, you have ashram which have become temples, and then there are Tirtha Kshetras. So Tirtha Kshetras, even today, there is no restriction of who can go, what can do. If there are any restrictions, they would be very recent. So for example, in Jagannath Puri, they have a restriction of foreigners not being allowed. But that can be traced to, a few hundred years ago due to something that may not have been acceptable. But otherwise, Tirtha Kshetras were open for everybody. They belong to, so it's like, I'll take the example of Kashi. Every community in India has a spot in Kashi. So you'll either have your matha, you'll have your ashram, you'll have somebody. So whole of India has its footprint in Kashi. So it belongs to everybody in a way.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so we spoke about spatial unity, by space, and by temporal, which is the festivals at a particular point in time.
Right.
So I also believe that there is this obviously it's all integrated together, but what are those cultural strands even among the subcultures that you spoke, right? You have spoken it in the book.
Right.
Those cultural strands that unite us.
So, for example, let's take the footprint of Sri Krishna in India. Okay. So he spent his childhood in Braj, Mathura. And he was there till maybe he was about 15, 16. Okay. And after that, he went to Sandipani in Ujjain. And then he came to Dwarka. He set up this city of Dwarka Puri. Okay. Or Dwaravati, it's called. And it was a very, very prosperous city in those times because there used to be a lot of shipping trade from the port. In Mathura, even today, Sri Krishna is treated as a lala or a small baby or a teenager who's playing, who's fooling around, who's naughty, who has friends, who used to go to the forest for, grazing of cows, who has friends, who played Holi, all that childhood Krishna and his Ras Leela is celebrated. That naughtiness is in the air, You come to Dwarka. Even in temples, you'll see in Dwarka, he's a complete family man. You would see him with Rukmini and his other 7 wives or 8 wives put together. You would see him with his parents, Devaki and Vasudev. You'll see him with his, brother and sister-in-law and their children, their Kulguru, their Kuldevi, everybody. So he becomes a complete family man. Even today, that tradition that these places would have seen continues to live. That diversity. Similarly for Sri Ram, in Ayodhya, he's always Ram Lala or Raja Ram because that's how Ayodhya saw him. You go to Janakpur in Mathila, he is seen as a groom. He is he's the groom with whom the women of Mithila can, fool around. They can tease him. They can pull his leg, which nobody else does anywhere else in the country. Because that's their relationship with him. The paintings, the expression in art that you see in Mithila is dominated by Ram Janki Vivah. So everything is around Ram Janki Vivah because that's what Janakpur saw. That's how Janakpur saw him. You come down south, you see Kodandaram because that's how South India saw him.
Because he was roaming around in the forest.
Yes,
with
with a bow.
bow. Yeah.
And they really didn't see too much of Sita.
Yeah.
So, and you see lot of Hanuman. You see lot of Anjaneya temples because this is his land.
Yeah.
So, in a way, the culture continues to live. If you see it in a very nuanced manner, that whatever has happened, and this gives me more conviction that these are not mythologies, these are our histories. Sure, there are layers of fiction that may have gotten added, exaggeration, poetic expression, literary liberties may have been taken here and there, but the core of the story did happen. So these are the strands that connect. Also, in our linguistics, if you see, we have expressions that any Indian very easily understands. So, for example, if I tell you that somebody is a Hanuman, you immediately understand that this person can be completely trusted with any task. If needed, he'll move mountains, but he'll complete the task.
He's like loyal.
Yeah. And dedicated and, trustworthy. You can trust him with the biggest of tasks, he will make it happen.
Yeah.
If I tell you somebody is Shakuni, you know that it's a person who's scheming. So these characters are a part of our linguistic expression. And you'll find some character to fit in every kind of situation.
Yeah.
And they have been transmitted to us more or less orally.
Yeah. Even the usage of Narad.
Yes.
Narad Muni, that idhar ka information udhar ka information either. That's also a popular usage.
Absolutely. Yeah. So everything. So if somebody says a woman is like Sita, she's pious. She's whatever. If you say she's like Manthara, what it is.
Yeah.
So we have all these expressions which are built into our vocabulary. And irrespective of what language we speak, we understand them. Second question that I had when I was researching on pilgrimage traditions of India, I wondered, how did people communicate? Because you are traveling. So I was studying the travels of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, and he traveled across the country, and he's like closer to us in time. So I was saying, how did he communicate?
Yeah.
There were so many languages.
Yeah.
But then I realized when you travel, the language, when we take a flight, the language switches. It's like a digital switch. You go from Bangalore to Delhi, you're switching from Kannada to Hindi. But when you walk from here to there, the language changes very slowly. So every 100 kilometers or so, few words will keep changing.
Yeah, the dialect also will change.
Dialect will change, and it flows from here to Delhi. The Kannada will flow into Hindi or the other way around.
Yeah.
So it slowly changes, and you also pick up when you do a slow travel. You also pick up.
Correct.
And second, so I have this study group where we study scriptures, and there are people from all across India. And every time we try to understand a Sanskrit word, all of us say, this is what we say in our language. The sound is little different, but it's the same word that we use in our language. So if you know Sanskrit vocabulary, every Indian language has a subset of that language.
Yeah.
And if you just can reorient your sound, you can pretty much understand any language. So we are not very different. We are made to look different. We are not very, very different.
So spatial, temporal by festivals, cultural strands, and as linguistic. So all these, definitely these four major points itself gives us the idea that this was already sort of a connected civilization. Obviously, there were warring kingdoms between each other that were fighting for the expansion of the land, and that was it.
So I always give this example of there is this temple in Kanchipuram called there's a Perumal temple Vaikuntha Perumal temple. And it's one of the oldest temples built by Pallavas. And then after Pallavas, Cholas came. It came under Vijayanagara Empire. And you can see their imprint. You can see that the temple was repaired by Cholas. It was repaired by Vijayanagara Empire. And there are a lot of temples. I'm giving this example because you in one picture, you can see the whole...
the change in styles.
The change in styles. And the fact that it over 800, 900 years, whoever was the king was working on preserving it.
Yeah.
So that also tells us that people may fight amongst themselves, but they would not hurt the civilizational elements.
Yeah.
They would preserve the civilizational elements, and they would bow down to the same deities.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, one more thing from the book itself and from other history books also is that, again, coming back to the narrative that is flowed, that, oh no, even before the Islamic invasions, people were fighting, Hindu kings were fighting with each other. They also looted, but the common strand there is, this is what, I mean, I can validate that from you, that even though they were warring between each other, let's say a kingdom has a major temple there. People would take the deity from that temple and go and establish it in the other kingdom. Is that
there are examples of that?
Yeah, can we talk about that?
So there is example of I think the Vithala temple in Hampi. So it was taken, brought back, and I don't remember the sequence. But I'll tell you the sequence of Govind Dev Ji from Mathura. So when Mathura is very close to Delhi, and it's on that ancient highway which is now called GT Road, but it was, in good old days, it was called Uttar Path, which is one of the major trade routes running from somewhere in the northwest till Dhaka or in the Bay of Bengal. So Mathura and Delhi are on that road, and Mathura is too close to Delhi. So when the invasion started, people would put them in their clothes, they will hide them in their headgear or somewhere. The journeys, you should read this book called Flight of Deities by Dr. Meenakshi Jain.
Yeah.
And she has documented many such movements of the deities. Now this deity, Govind Dev Ji, was taken from here, moved like 15 kilometers away in a small village. Then from there it moved somewhere it was worshipped in a house, somewhere a small temple was built. And sometimes they did not build the temple, not because they did not have the resources, but because the temple would attract attention. Then eventually it reached Amer, and when the city of Jaipur was being built, they decided to make it. They first made the temple to Govind Dev Ji, and then they made the city around it, and which is pretty much how the ancient cities were built. And I'm sure, it's my belief that today Jaipur is a prosperous city because they first installed the deity and then built the temple around it, the city around it. So there are many, many examples of deities who've traveled due to invasions and then brought back. Some of them are lost as well. There's so many examples of that. And there are so many examples when people have taken over the place, the temples continue.
Yeah.
So if you go today to forts like Chittorgarh Fort in Rajasthan, it's one of the oldest forts. It traces its history back to Mauryan era. And there have been different dynasties that have ruled, and it has faced the famous wars and everything. Today, when you go there, the palaces are gone, everything is gone, everything is in ruins. The only living things in that place are the temples. At most places, the shikharas are replaced with the gumbaj. You can see the signs of invasion, but the temples are still worshipping. There is a beautiful Shiva temple, there's a beautiful Varaha temple, there is a Mirabai's temple where she used to pray to Krishna, and whole lot of Devi temples, but all of them are working temples. So what survives even today after the forts and palaces are gone in most places is the temples. Which tells that even during the worst times, there were some people who were making sure that the temples live
Correct.
on.
Yeah. That's the one point which comes out of Dr. Meenakshi Jain's book, right? That they used to take the deities, the idols, and hide it in bury it on the earth or in
But
water.
yeah, so that was one where they had to flee.
Yeah.
And I think Goa is a great example where it was a land of Saraswat Brahmins. So when they had to flee, they all flee with the deity in different places.
Yeah.
And then one Hindu king came and they gave them place in a place called Ponda Taluk, which is there today. And all the temples are huddled there. So last 300, 400 years, all the temples are huddled there, which used to be spread across the state there. And all the Saraswat Brahmins even today go there to worship their Kul Devtas, which are now there in Ponda. So they were there. But the point that I was trying to make is that if everything else is gone and the temple survives, even if you go to places like Tanjore, you don't see any palaces per se. You know, you see the recent ones, but not the ancient ones. But the temples continue to live. One, the temples were built with the best technology, best resources, best everything was used for building the temples. And they had longevity. And they had the patronage from both the royals as well as from the general public. You know, so a lot of times the royal patronage gets documented, but the patronage from a common devotee is not so well documented. If you read the story of Kashi Vishwanath also, you know, there it was invaded many times. But the moment you say it was invaded many times, it means it was also rebuilt as many times.
Yeah. There's the Somnath temple.
Yes.
That's a great example.
Right.
Right from Muhammad Ghazni till Aurangzeb, I think it was getting rebuilt and rebuilt.
They said it was attacked about 17 times.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah. So almost all temples of North India. I mean, these are the big temples that we know of. I came across, I grew up in a city called Chandigarh. And I recently, I mean, about 5-6 years back, I found a ancient temple of Bhima Kali. It's a deity which is mentioned in Durga Saptashati as one of the devis who will be there in this era. And that you can only see the ruins of the temple, the basement, the outline of the temple, and whatever is received from the excavations, they've kept it in a museum. So, but when you see all that, it belongs to Pratiharas, I think, if I'm not wrong. So there were temples in North India who were as big, as grand, built as per the Shastras, Vastu Shastras, which we've completely lost. Completely lost. Because there was no chance of rebuilding them. One or two temples that have survived, there is Jageshwar Dham in the Kumbh Hills. That's where no invaders could reach. I mean, it's hidden inside the fold of Himalayas. You know, there's a complete fold across the one of the ranges, and it's in the corner. There you can see some bit of a good construction, a group of temples all dedicated to Shiva mostly, with stories of Shiva. There's the oldest Mrityunjay temple there, and it's a Jyotirling, Nageshwar Jyotirling, surrounded by Daruk Van. You know, so some of them have survived, but thankfully South India has kind of preserved a lot of temples, so we know how they were, and hopefully we can rebuild.
Correct. That's because most of these invaders couldn't come to the south because there were a lot of not as much, because there were a lot of restrictions from the north rulers itself. I mean, they were fighting. They were fighting all the time so that they couldn't.
South is little isolated, but having said that, South had its own share.
You
know, almost every temple has been touched.
Correct.
I think I think the temples of Kanchipuram are the ones where I could feel that they have been continuously worshipped. So even if I don't think they were attacked, not to the best of my knowledge, but even if they were, the worship potentially continued.
Correct.
So you can feel that
The
energy there.
Yes. Yeah.
And the temples that are displaced, you can feel that disturbance in energy.
Correct,
And
yeah.
most temples are displaced. A lot of them are
Yeah,
displaced.
yeah.
For example, the famous Kapaleshwara temple in Chennai is not at its original place.
So you called yourself a pilgrim, right? So if one has to, let's say, lead or even travel, right, to the temples, one has to be a pilgrim, right? One has to be a believer.
It will be better if you are a believer.
Yeah.
I mean, I also hope that even if you are not and you keep visiting temples, one day you will become. It could be a journey. But it will be good if you understand the pilgrimage traditions.
So it's like you are a seeker.
Yes.
Right.
You are a sadhak. You are somebody who wants to go inwards, who wants to grow spiritually.
So then in that perspective, we were talking offline. What's the travel scene right now in India?
I don't know. I mean, today everybody's traveling. I mean, I see people more outside their homes than inside their homes. So 5 days a week you are outside to work, and then 2 days a week you need to go out somewhere. I think at this point in time, we probably need to fall in love with our own homes or the home.
This is coming from a traveler.
Yes.
Why is that?
See, you travel out to learn something.
Yes.
You know, if even if you are not talking about pilgrimage travel, you travel out. So I used to be an innovation consultant once upon a time. I still study innovation a lot. So travel to me is one of the biggest university. You know, you go out of your comfort zone. You go out and meet people who are unlike you. You go out and eat food that you may not be comfortable with. You learn new things. You see new things with new eyes, you know. If I have to go to another place and meet the same people and demand the same food. Demand the same luxury. I mean, hotels are same across the world. If you are sitting inside a hotel room, you could be anywhere in the world. You know, even the temperature is same. The look and feel is same. It's good to have that sameness if you are on a business trip because it gives you a comfort. But if you are out to explore, then that sameness kind of kills that curiosity. So if I'm getting the same things, I don't see a reason to travel. This travel has to be a learning experience. You know, it has to be something that you should not be the same person coming back.
Yeah, seeking basically.
Yeah, no, it has to change you. It has to give you new perspectives. Seeking may be a little too much for everybody. But it has to teach you something. It has to teach you something. Today we are creating replicas of every place. So I don't know, you know. So you should travel, but mindless travel, I'm not too sure.
Mindless travel and to put it on social media travel.
So social media is what in Hindi we call dodhari talwar or double-edged sword. It shares information, but at some point in time, the social media engagement or the like count takes over, and then we start creating content what we think will click, or clickbait content.
Correct.
But I'm hoping that this is a bubble which will burst on its own, because how much of the high volume content are we going to consume? At some point in time, people are going to fed up and they would want a very it's like, we have to get over these news channels, and at some point in time we'll get back to Doordarshan era where somebody calmly tells you what happened during the day.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that this social media hyper stuff would pass away soon.
Okay.
I'm hoping
maybe.
that.
Yeah. Maybe.
And people start using social media for a good purpose. I mean, I always say social media is a tool. It's up to us how we use it. There are people who use it brilliantly to bring change. I mean, we've seen somebody has made the whole country read labels, food labels. How brilliantly has he used social media?
Correct.
There are people who are making a lot of great content, helping us even know that this kind of things exist, you know. So for example, when I read scriptures every morning, so every time I'm reading, I share whatever snippets I think are
That's there.
relevant for my audience, and people at least come to know that something like this exists. And then once you know something like this exists, today finding the, you know, details and getting the books is not a big deal. So it is great, but like I said, you know, it's up to us how we use it.
Right.
But as consumers of content, we need to start focusing on good content, then the creators will follow.
Yeah. That's a good way, beautiful way to sort of, you know, put out a message there that how you can use certain things,
Right.
what are there, and not to overuse it.
Right.
Right.
And especially this high volume, hyper content, which is almost fake.
Yeah, because why I'm saying, asking that is that, like you said, the traveling of temples is to learn and seek. It has become like almost like only a background for your Instagram
Yes,
reel, right?
yes,
Going and dancing in front of a temple. I'm not saying you should not do that, but just for the sake of that. But there is a temple there. There is an energy there.
Right.
So it's more of seeking that thing to go a little more higher than just using it for your own, you know, getting more likes. That's what I mean.
I would say if you tap into that energy will give you far more likes than your dancing around can give you.
Perfect. Yeah. That's
You know,
that's yeah. That's,
you know, so it's like we typically say in spiritual traditions that, you know, what I can ask for is only X, and what he can give is infinite.
Yeah.
You know, so by asking for X, you are actually telling him, leave the infinite, give me only X.
Yeah.
You know, the same goes for social media. But I said this will pass. I mean, I seriously think it will pass.
Good. That's a very optimistic way. Let's maybe conclude this section here and move on to the next section.
Sure.
So let's talk there.
Sure.
See you on the other side, ma'am.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.